One last piece, and it's pretty much the same thing that you're noticing that a lot of these legislations are. And remember, I talked to you about these things, and the thing to consider is how these things actually work in lockstep. And there's another bit of fucking legislation which is actually missing from this. I'll get back to this in a second. Such a rush, drug stats. This one is actually COVID related. Oh, surprise, surprise. The Medicine Amendment Bill allows the Minister of Health to give provisional consent for a medicine. Okay, so it gives provisional consent where limited information means that full consent process is not available. So where you get limited information is when, for example, Pfizer has a new GMO product which they don't want to tell you the bits and pieces about it, and they've been rubber stamped because they've got the FDA in their back pocket because the FDA guy's going to leave the FDA and go and work for Pfizer, which is, because that's never happened before, has it? And so we get to turn around and look at a drug which we don't really know what's actually in it, and the Minister of Health, who can turn around and say, "Oh, we're all good with that." And so it's yet just like the New Hazardous Organisms Act and even the Safety Screen Act. There, you see that three of the legislations that are actually coming in here are basically about empowering the government to turn around and override your protections that stop you from being actually used as a fucking guinea pig. And because, of course, the public and market relationships, we've all been hammered into thinking that that's totally okay. And I know those dirty, GMO is wonderful. This is all again part of that whole situation, and it's a technical. I'm just going to put it. It's a technical amendment to the Medicine Act and clarifies the law after the High Court ruled that the Minister of Health could grant approval for MedSafe approved medicines to be used. It was not certain whether that was possible for the whole population or just a number of select people. So the whole idea was originally the idea was that law was meant to be only used for small amounts of people, and it became for like drug trials. And these are the drug trials where that you might get a very radical form of cancer. You don't have great chances, so any chances there is a chance. Little groups occur, and you sign off on it because that was how we develop medicines. What's happened after COVID is that we've turned around and we've introduced entirely new medicines that have entirely new ingredients which we don't know nothing about. The organisations overseas that are actually approving them are as shady as hell, and they were never designed to be used for mass populations because that actually is an experimentation. But now we're going to legislate that to make that actually a-okay. So it's just one more thing that just freaks me, it just creeps me out. And it's, there's this one also saying that the Medicine Act 1991 is out of date, and the government has been working on replacing it with a new Therapeutic Products Act to be expected to introduce this year. If that new Therapeutic Products Act is anything like Annette King's role in the Natural Medicines Labelling, I think, Act, which was done in 2008, at the same time that the government carried out secret GMO trials under Helen Clark, and that we also 1.5 million children got exposed to an experimental vaccine for which the Norwegian government later actually apologised, at the same time that the lab technicians involved in that basically got paid out for ACC because it ended up actually eating flesh eating their limbs off. Literally, they ended up being with no limbs. And so that was all done so that the idea was that from now on, all those things could be regulated in Australia, where, God knows, the there was less approval. And again, it's all part of this whole corporate globalisation that, it's at the end of the day, the regulatory authorities are bought lock, stock and smoking by these corporate lobbying agents. And we don't seem to be addressing that or owning up to that reality of that situation. In fact, it's just got worse and worse. And as we're looking at big corporations that are consolidating media control, which again, we're seeing pass through in acts and creation of new agencies in New Zealand. That's becoming even worse. So as I said to you, it's our journalism is actually under attack. It's basically being hijacked by governments. Like, if you don't do what we say, then we won't actually give you the money. So now we're going to actually pit journalists that rely on us for money, who we can then leak information, and then they can hammer on other people because those people will be protected because we've provided no form of legislation or protection against the idea that journalists should not be actually susceptible. I mean, it goes back to the whole thing of, like I said to you, and this journalism needs the same thing. Back in the day, the DSSIR was firewalled against political influence and was firewalled against corporate influence by its budgetary and a whole bunch of other things. Under Labour, the neoliberal government of the 1984, which just carried on, national Labour's changed, but it's just carried on. It's got worse and worse. Our media's got stupider and stupider. We're now at a point where a lot of educated left-wing people aren't actually that left-wing. They seem to be quite happy to tolerate things which are just shouldn't be within our left value. And again, we're seeing this acknowledgement via what's happening with the Green Party right now, which is something that's way overdue. It's like hallelujah. It's the one great thing about 2022 years so far is the Greens are within their own ranks are starting to realise that their leadership has actually sold the party out, and it's time to actually go back to core values about what kind of country do we want in terms of the health of our citizens, which these were appointed under the three wise men, who helped fund the Labour Party and its health policy, New Zealand's Health Future for Tomorrow, I think it was called. And one of their conditions was the idea that people would actually have availability to health, they'd have the ability to choose health options for themselves. And now fast forward, we're watching basically the full-on 100% privatisation of the health sector, using things like TPA and these kind of laws that we're actually looking at right now. And no one's really considering what the consequences of this is going to do. I mean, we're literally looking at right now, there's just alone in cancers alone, we're looking at 10,000 people who basically have gone from being treatable to fatal because they were unable to get treatment during COVID. We're seeing numerous people now, because of the fact that the drugs that are going to be available are becoming more and more expensive. They can't get drug or treatment. We're seeing other treatments being delayed. We're literally watching our health system collapse as it gets privatised. And unfortunately, this is also happening to our democratic principles. And to a certain degree, not just our laws, but our mindset. We seem to be willing to tolerate and accept this neoliberal, basically it's just fucking greed, And they put it out and they dress it out in a whole bunch of identity politics that allows people to make themselves feel good about themselves and make themselves think they're left, while they're still just rushing out to try and make as much money as they possibly can. And that money is the almighty fucking God of the new 20th century, while our planet burns to death. And we talk about climate change and wanting to make a better, healthy planet, but all we seem to be doing is giving more money and more power to the very people that will actually burn this planet to a crisp, if permitted, if we don't wake up to right now and start saying, no, you're not the ones that were the rights, we're the ones that were the rights, and you need to start doing what we want. Anyway, that's my little spiel on the quirky new laws that are passing through Parliament this year and what their common denominators are. Not mentioned in this one is two that haven't mentioned really gone into the air, is they haven't gone anywhere near the Public State Sector Reform 2020 bill, which is a real dog turd. And I think it's into its third reading. It should be be passed this year. It allows ministers to have basically unlimited power to extended tender contracts and to write out cheques without any oversight or accountability. It can turn around and interfere in other agencies by saying, well, these are the big issues, so we have the right to do these. And this again is about the redefining the definition of emergency, which is snuck under COVID, which we haven't really been paying any attention to. Also, when we turn around, we look at things like the Declaration of Inconsistency Bill, also one of the new bills that's being put forward, but not mentioned in this little puff piece about all these wonderful new laws. Isn't it great? Wonderful. Let's not look too deeply in that. No, don't worry about that. Nothing to see, move along. And the Inconsistency Bill, which is basically about the idea that if anyone challenges the right, so in this case, doctors turn around and said, no, wait a minute, medicine was never meant to be used that way. They just changed the law because they said, oh, we don't need to pay attention to that. They ignored the Bill of Rights, the right. In fact, the judges ignored the rights, and they did it in a way which is actually did us a favour. But had they turned around and paid, addressed and accepted the Bill of Rights 1990, all the judges would have been able to turn around and do is go, that's terrible, but there's nothing we can do about it. Instead they backed away from that because the Crown ultimately they turned around and those legal challenges and said, oh no, we're not forcing anybody to do anything. We're just strongly advising them. So think about that, There's a lot of bullshit going on here, and people are accepting things because we've spent basically 3 decades in New Zealand where none of our public have actually grown up with civic education, which we used to actually have. That's been another thing that's been taken away from our public and disempowered us. But what we have with this declaration of inconsistency is that the new law, and when you read through it carefully, it's 92J is the subsection standard. It says, refer to Tribunal 1962J. Well, in that Declaration of Inconsistency Bill, there is no 92J. That actually turns out to be the not the Bill of Rights, it's the Human Rights Act 1993, and 92J basically says in the event of a dispute, then that will be overseen by the United Nations Troika. So just like the TPA, it's another set of law, which removes the ability of us to have control over our own lives, our own sovereignty, our own future, decide what kind of country we want New Zealand to be, what we want its core values to be, and it places them in the place of basically the capitals of people that are really actually all about, the great church of money, and that's all they want to do. And they just seem to be determined to have more and more and more while the planet gets sicker and sicker. And it really is literally quite heartbreaking. Anyway, that's my little spiel.